Is Russia back on offense in Zaporizhzhia? But is the U.S. preparing its own aid package for Ukraine? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's November 4th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, taking a look at the control map, a couple of interesting changes. The first of which is outside of Staromayorsk, right near the town of Bryutine. You can see Russian forces securing this tree line right here. And as we talked about yesterday, the biggest threat this sort of poses is to Ukrainian troops trying to hold Staromayorsk and Oruzane. These are hard-fought villages that were liberated after a tremendous amount of fighting. But as Russia advances closer to the town itself, it creates an increasing problem for the defenders because they are facing Russian forces not just to their south, but increasingly on their western flank. And as Russia advances towards Staromayorsk, right, it's going to become harder and harder for Ukrainian troops to hold these positions. Something somewhat similar is playing out in the north near Preshnotynieve. You can see that the Russian troops who had driven Ukrainian forces back in this region have now advanced themselves and are increasing the pressure on Ukrainian forces, particularly those in this small cluster of villages near Stepova, Novoselivka. And again, as they try to advance, again, they've got some tough terrain to work through, these two large hilltops. But as they get closer, they may actually begin to find that they can threaten Ukrainian forces in this salient from a second direction. And while we know these are lower densities of forces, the ability to maneuver actually can be increased, as we talked about. And it remains to be seen if this is going to materialize in any substantive threat. Again, this is tough. Seizing hilltops is a tough order, but we are seeing for the first time in a while 2 consecutive days where there's actually been advances in this region. You can see over the last 3 days, Russian troops near Lyman Pershi are actually making, advances and kind of holding them. Oftentimes we see these lines push and pull and move and not really change. They get seized, they get counterattacked. But who knows? This could be part of a larger change, or it could simply be another push that in a week will be either stopped or rolled back. When we look over at the combat map, you can see, interestingly, Russian forces stepping up their artillery game, probably a result of the increased artillery shells that have been provided by North Korea, and the fact that Ukraine is starting to probably run a little bit low on its own artillery, right? They depend on Europe and the United States to manufacture these 155 shells, but we simply don't have the capacity to generate enough shells to match the supply that the Russians are able to draw on from Soviet stores and now from the North Koreans. And when you have that, right, this more conservative Ukrainian artillery posture might be emboldening Russia to use more of its artillery in these attacks. Of course, guys, if you have been on this channel for any length of time, you know that I have launched my own gum, Strike Gum, right? This is an alternative to your energy drinks, right? Where energy drinks are like $5 a pop, loaded with sugar, carbonated, taste pretty gross. Strike Gum is a refreshing mint flavor, 0 sugar, just 5 calories per piece. And each one of these little pieces contain 90 milligrams of caffeine plus 100 milligrams of alpha GPC. Best of all, if each purchase of Strike Gum, at least for this first production run, the 50% of the profits are going to support Ukrainian charities who provide assistance to displaced or injured civilians. So if you want to support Ukraine and get a way of more affordable energy drink alternative, check us out at strikegum.com. We actually have the trays on sale, which means each tray has 75 pieces. So you can get the equivalent caffeine of 75 energy drinks for literally like 68 cents a piece. So check us out at strikegum.com. Now, here's a couple of charts that I found pretty interesting. First, this is from our friend at WarMapper, and this represents simply each one of these bars represents the entire territory of Ukraine. The purple represents Russian occupied before the invasion, and red represents Russian occupied after the invasion. And you can see that as the war has drug on, there were significant changes early in the war, right, with Russian forces advancing to their apex in March, then withdrawing after the Battle of Kiev. And then you see here these two clips, the Kharkiv offensive and Kherson offensive, and then you can see how things slowed down. The only barely perceptible change is right here, and this is the grueling Battle of Bakhmut, where Russia seized the town and some surrounding areas in an absolute, like, grind fest. And then since then, there's barely a pixel's worth of movement. All these fighting, all these battles, all this material for no measurable gain. Now, the gain, of course, the theory that Ukraine seemed to be operating under was that the Russian political establishment, right, is unwilling to declare this a total war, and that therefore, simply by inflicting an absolutely eye-watering number of casualties on Russia for a war of choice would force the political hand in Russia. But Russia's willingness to take absolutely preposterous levels of casualties is beyond, frankly, something that anyone could have expected. Russia's probably suffered around the equivalent of for the U.S., the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, basically the equivalent of 15 Iraqs. In the span of a year and a half. So you would think the public would be extremely tired of it, but they're not. They're not. Or they don't have a choice, which is more likely. Anyway, the other thing that is worth noting is that the Department of Defense has announced a new military aid package at Ukraine, primarily for air defenses. Of course, we know that in the winter, Russia pivots to air attacks targeting Ukrainian infrastructure, both far behind the front lines and at the front lines. The DoD is providing, of course, munitions for a surface-to-air missile system and HIMARS, as well as TOW anti-tank missiles, Javelins, AT-4s, and 3 million small arms ammunition rounds and grenades, as well as a $300 Ukrainian security assistance that will strengthen their air defenses over the long term, and of course some laser-guided munitions to counter UAVs. Interesting recognition of the UAV threat. Anyway, guys, that's really all I had for you. Thank you so much. Hit like and subscribe. Thanks to our Colonel tier members. Thanks to our Lieutenant tier members at combatvetnews.com. We had some videos just drop yesterday from the fighting in Israel and in Ukraine. They're definitely worth checking out. They're pretty exciting. Thanks to all the members. See you in the next one. Cheers.